The empire didn't die on a battlefield, it died on paper, with shaking hands, broken promises, and signatures forced by hunger. So what happens if, in the darkest hour of 1918, the Ottoman Empire refuses to vanish? Because if the Ottomans survived, the modern world would look like a different planet. The story begins with a silence, not the peaceful kind. The kind that comes after artillery stops, after the screaming fades, after a nation looks down at its own hands and realizes it has nothing left to hold. It's 1918. The Ottoman Empire is bleeding out. 4 years of world war I have hollowed it. Soldiers are skin and bone. Mothers trade jewelry for bread. In Istanbul, the Bosphorus still glitters, but it feels like a funeral candle, trembling in wind. In our timeline, the Ottomans collapse. They're carved up, occupied, humiliated, and from their ashes rises a new state, Turkey. But now, imagine this: the Sultan doesn't surrender. Not because he's brave, because he's terrified. Terrified of what happens to an empire when it becomes a memory. Terrified of foreign boots on sacred ground. Terrified of waking up one morning and realizing even the word Ottoman has been erased. So he makes a decision that shocks everyone around him. He calls in the one man who doesn't tremble, a general, a reformer. A soldier with eyes like steel and a soul full of contradictions, Mustafa Kemal. But in this world, Kemal doesn't build a republic instead of the empire. He saves the empire by ripping it open and rebuilding it while it's still alive, and that changes everything. In 1919, Allied ships sit off Istanbul like predators. British officers walk the streets like they own the air. Greek troops land in Smyrna. Armenian survivors dream of justice. Arab leaders sharpen their knives, ready to cut themselves free. The Ottoman Empire is surrounded by enemies and haunted by its own sins. And then Kemal does something no one expects. He speaks to the empire like it's a wounded person, not an idea, not a flag, a living thing. He stands before exhausted commanders and says, "We will not die politely." But here's the twist. He doesn't promise a return to the old Ottoman glory. No fantasy, no denial. He says the empire must evolve, or it will rot from the inside out. He proposes something radical: a constitutional Ottoman federation, a new empire not built on forced obedience, but on negotiated belonging. And for a moment, the palace is silent, because what he's suggesting is more dangerous than surrender. He's suggesting letting go of control. The old guard hates him. The conservatives call him a traitor. The foreign powers laugh. But the people, starving, grieving, furious, listen, because they don't want speeches. They want bread, dignity, safety. And Kemal offers them something that feels impossible: a future. Now think about this. What if the Ottomans didn't try to glue the past back together? What if they admitted the empire was changing, and changed faster than the knives around them? The year is 1920. In our timeline, the Treaty of slices the empire into pieces like meat on a table. But in this world, that treaty never becomes reality, because the Ottomans, under Kemal's leadership, do something bold and desperate. They refuse to sign. They announce to the world, "We will negotiate as a living state, not as a corpse." And then the real war begins. Not just armies, not just bullets, a war of legitimacy, a war of morale, a war for the right to exist. In Anatolia, villages become fortresses. In the mountains, teenagers carry rifles too big for their shoulders. In Istanbul, Ottoman spies and British agents play chess with human lives. Greek forces push inland, villages burn, refugees flood the roads, carrying babies and blankets and nothing else. A mother named Layla runs barefoot, through smoke with her son pressed to her chest. She doesn't know politics. She doesn't care about treaties. She cares about one thing: survival. And survival in this world becomes the empire's new religion. Kemal fights the Greeks as he did in real history. But his message is different. He isn't fighting to create Turkey alone. He's fighting to keep the empire from being dismembered. He broadcasts a promise across every province. If you stay, you will not be ruled like subjects anymore. You will be citizens, that word. Citizens. It hits like thunder, because citizen means something in the Ottoman world. It means you can't be erased so easily. It means the empire finally admits the people aren't just fuel for war. They are the reason the state exists. And slowly, painfully, different groups begin to hesitate before leaving. Not all. Some wounds are too deep. Some dreams of independence are too bright to put back in the bottle. But in this timeline, the breakup isn't total, because Kemal offers a new deal, a federation with semi-autonomous regions. Arab provinces get representation and local control. Kurds get recognized rights, language protections, and political seats. Armenians, instead of being pushed into the shadows of tragedy alone, are offered international guarantees, protected zones, and a place in a shared future. Is it clean? No. Is it perfect? No, but it's something history rarely offers. A second chance before the final gunshot. But then something changed. In 1922, the Sultan looks at Kemal and realizes something terrifying. The man who saved the empire could also end it, because loyalty is fragile when people taste power. The palace fears being replaced, the reformers fear being betrayed, the streets feel electric, one wrong step, and civil war could swallow everything. This is the moment, this is the knife edge. In our timeline, the Sultanate is abolished, but in this world, Kemal makes a choice that shocks both sides. He doesn't execute the monarchy, he cages it. He turns the Sultan into a constitutional symbol like a crowned relic, while real power moves to an elected parliament. The Sultan remains, but his hands are tied with law, and the empire survives. As a new creature, a modern Ottoman federation, and that changes the 20th century like a hammer to glass, because if the Ottoman Empire survives, then the Middle East is not carved up the same way. The Sykes-Picot lines, the foreign-drawn borders that cut tribes and histories in half don't solidify into destiny. Syria doesn't become the same kind of fractured mandate. Iraq isn't assembled like a puzzle by outsiders with oil on their minds. Palestine's future becomes a different kind of storm, because now there is a living imperial authority reformed, pressured, watched by the world standing in the middle of it all. And suddenly the question becomes, who controls the Holy Land when the old empire never leaves? Imagine this. In Jerusalem, Ottoman gendarmes patrol stone streets. A Jewish family arrives, fleeing European pogroms, and files papers not with a British office but with an Ottoman federal bureau. An Arab farmer petitions a local council that actually has Ottoman legal force. The tensions still exist, the fear still exists, but the referee is different. Not Britain, not France. A Muslim-majority empire trying to modernize while balancing a region that feels like a fuse, and the fuse doesn't disappear, it just burns differently. Now fast forward, Europe is about to erupt again. Hitler is rising, Stalin is watching, the world is sleepwalking into World War II. In our timeline, Turkey stays mostly neutral, playing a careful game. But in this world, the Ottoman Federation is bigger, more strategic, more tempted, because it controls the Dardanelles, it touches the Balkans, it's at the crossroads of oil, trade, and war. And suddenly, everyone wants Istanbul. Germany whispers promises, territory, glory, revenge against old enemies. Britain offers protection and money. The Soviets offer fear, and inside the empire, the parliament is split. Some want neutrality. Some want to join the Allies to secure international legitimacy. Some want to reclaim lost lands in the Balkans. Now think about this. Imagine being a young Ottoman soldier in 1940. Your uniform is modern, but the crescent insignia still sits on your chest like a ghost of centuries. You stand on the shore of the Bosphorus at night and watch ships move like shadows. You wonder, if war comes, will the empire finally die? Or will it prove it deserves to live? The decision is delayed until 1941. A German-backed coup attempt ignites violence in a Balkan Ottoman province. It's not just politics, it's street fights, assassinations, bombs in. A father walks his daughter to school and hears gunfire echo down the alley. He pushes her behind a wall and whispers, "Don't look," but she looks anyway. She sees a man fall. She sees blood on cobblestone. She sees history doing what it always does, using ordinary people as paper for its signatures. The Ottoman parliament votes. They join the Allies. And overnight, the empire becomes a battlefield magnet. World War II hits Ottoman territory like a storm with teeth. German planes bomb coastal infrastructure. Spies flood Istanbul. Refugees pour in from Europe, Jews, dissidents, Roma families, anyone running from the machine. And here's where the story becomes personal. Because the Ottoman Empire surviving means Istanbul becomes something it never was in our timeline. A door that stays open. Imagine a Jewish violinist escaping Vienna. He reaches Istanbul. He expects suspicion. He expects rejection. Instead, an Ottoman clerk stamps his papers and says, "You are under federal protection." The violinist cries in the street, not because he's safe forever, but because for the first time in years, someone treated him like a human, not a problem. This is how empires win loyalty, not with flags, with moments. The war ends in 1945. The world is rearranged. America rises. The Soviet Union expands. And in this new Cold War, the Ottoman Federation becomes one of the most important pieces on the board because it borders the Soviet sphere, because it controls warm water routes, because it sits on energy corridors. In our timeline, Turkey joins NATO in 1952. In this world, the Ottoman Federation joins earlier, and with more weight. But it also has a problem, a dangerous one. It is multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and still healing, and Cold War powers love nothing more than a crack they can widen. In the 1950s and 60s, nationalist movements rise inside the Federation. Arab federalists push for more autonomy. Kurdish leaders demand full equality, not promises. Greek minorities in Ottoman lands fear retaliation after decades of war memories. Armenian communities demand truth, reparations, and justice for the crimes that still haunt the empire's soul. The Ottoman government tries to hold it together with reforms, elections, and infrastructure. But beneath the speeches is a question no empire escapes. Can you keep people together without forcing them? And then the oil money arrives, not like a blessing, like a curse. Because the Ottoman Federation, surviving into the mid-20th century, finds itself sitting on or near some of the world's most valuable energy regions. Pipelines become arteries, ports become gold mines, foreign companies arrive with smiles and contracts, and suddenly the empire is wealthy enough to modernize fast highways, cut through Anatolia. Universities bloom in Damascus and Baghdad-style federal capitals. Hospitals rise, television spreads, and the Ottoman identity is rebranded, no longer the sick man of Europe. Now it is the bridge of the world. Now think about this. Imagine being a young woman in 1970 Istanbul. You wear modern clothes, study engineering, and ride a tram through neighborhoods older than most countries. You hear the call to prayer in the distance. You also hear rock music and you realize you're living inside a contradiction that somehow works. But contradictions don't always survive pressure. Then comes the moment where everything changes, the climax, and it doesn't start with an invasion. It starts with a broadcast. The year is 1979. In our timeline, the Iranian Revolution shocks the region, inspiring movements, terrifying monarchies, shifting geopolitics. In this world, the Ottoman Federation's survival changes the psychology of the entire Middle East, because there is now a living example of a Muslim-majority state modernizing without completely abandoning tradition that makes the revolution next door even more explosive. Religious radicals call the Ottoman model a lie. Secular radicals call it a trap. Foreign powers call it an opportunity. And within Ottoman lands, extremist factions begin to gain ground. Bombings hit markets. Assassinations target judges. A governor is killed outside a courthouse, and his son watches from a car window, frozen, unable to scream. And the empire faces the nightmare every empire fears, not invasion from outside, but collapse from within. The Ottoman leadership calls an emergency session of parliament. Debate turns into shouting. Shouting turns into threats. Outside, crowds gather. Some wave flags and demand order. Some wave banners and demand revolution. Police lines tremble. A single stone hits a helmet. A gunshot cracks the air, and suddenly the crowd becomes a wave. People run, people fall, people trample. A young conscript, barely 18, raises his rifle with shaking hands. He doesn't want to shoot, but he's afraid, and fear makes monsters out of boys. This is the moment. This is where the Ottoman Empire either becomes a modern federation that survives the 20th century, or becomes a civil war zone like so many others. And in this alternate history, the decision is made. Kemal is long gone, dead for decades. But his legacy remains in the Constitution, and one clause buried, rarely used, awakens like a sleeping lion. A federal reconciliation convention, an emergency mechanism forcing all provinces to renegotiate power sharing under international supervision. It's risky, it's humiliating, it's the kind of thing proud states hate, but it's also smart, because instead of meeting rebellion with pure force, the empire meets it with structure, negotiation, concessions, and accountability. War is avoided by inches, not because everyone suddenly loves each other, but because they fear the alternative more. Imagine this. Leaders who used to spit each other's names across tables now sit in the same room and sign an agreement. More autonomy for provinces, guaranteed minority protections, anti-corruption courts, truth commissions for historical crimes, a rebalanced parliament where regions cannot be drowned out by the center. The Ottoman Federation is reborn again, not as a conquest empire, but as a constitutional union, and that becomes the turning point, the climax. The moment the empire stops being a survivor and becomes a model. Now the 1990s arrive. In our timeline, the Soviet Union collapses, the Balkans burn, the Middle East enters new cycles of war. In this world, an Ottoman Federation stable enough, large enough, and strategically central changes the ripple. The Balkans still have tension, yes, but there is a major regional power with deep historical ties and a vested interest in preventing total collapse. Refugee crises are managed differently. Wars are shorter, or at least contained faster. The Ottoman Federation becomes a mediator, sometimes fair, sometimes self-interested, always influential, and now comes a haunting question. If the Ottomans survived, does the West vs Middle East story even exist the same way? Because you now have a civilizational bridge that never snapped by the early 2000s. The Ottoman Federation is something the world struggles to categorize. It's not Europe. It's not the Middle East the way news anchors say it. It's a multi-continental federation with elections, an empowered religious establishment, secular courts, and a culture that's both ancient and aggressively modern. Its cities glow at night like necklaces. Istanbul becomes one of the world's financial capitals. Damascus becomes a technology hub. Baghdad becomes an intellectual center again, not a headline for war. Now think about this. What happens to global terrorism narratives when the region's strongest state isn't a collapsed dictatorship or a fractured monarchy, but a functioning federation? Extremists still exist, but recruitment becomes harder when people have jobs, representation, and hope. Not impossible, but harder, and history is often decided by harder, not impossible. And then we reach the present day in this alternate timeline. You scroll your phone and see the world map, and it doesn't look familiar because the Ottoman Federation still exists, not as the empire of sultans and janissaries, but as a modern union that grew out of an empire's refusal to die. You book a flight from Vienna to Jerusalem with one passport stamp. You watch Ottoman federal news channels debate policy in Turkish, Arabic, Kurdish, Greek, Armenian, subtitled in modernized Latin-based Ottoman script. You hear an old man in A. Tell a child, we used to be an empire, and the child replies, we still are. Just a different kind, but is it better? Or is it simply different? Because survival comes with a price, a haunting one. When an empire survives, it also keeps its shadows alive. Old grudges don't dissolve, they ferment. Historical crimes don't disappear, they echo. Every time the Ottoman Federation celebrates unity, someone somewhere remembers a family that vanished, a village that burned, a language that was banned, a rebellion that was crushed. Empires survive not by being innocent, but by learning to carry guilt without collapsing under it, and that is the part most alternate histories skip, the human cost. So let's talk about a single person again. Layla, the mother from Anatolia, running in smoke in 1920. In this timeline, she survives. She grows old in a federation that modernizes around her. She watches her son become a teacher, then a parliament clerk, then a man who votes in elections his grandfather couldn't imagine. One day in the 1979 crisis, she watches riots on television, her hands trembling. She whispers a prayer, not for victory, for survival, because she has learned what empires are made of. Not marble, not flags, not speeches. They are made of ordinary people who keep living anyway. So what if the Ottoman Empire survived? Maybe the Middle East would have been less carved, less fractured, less manipulated. Maybe modern borders would make more sense, or maybe they'd make an entirely new kind of tension. Maybe some wars would have been avoided, maybe others would have been worse. But here's the deeper truth. Empires don't die because they run out of soldiers. They die because they run out of imagination. They refuse to become what the next century demands. So if the Ottoman Empire survived, it would only be because at the last second it did the one thing empires hate most. It changed, and that is the haunting lesson. Not that power lasts forever, not that history is fair, but that survival belongs to the ones who can look at a collapsing world and still dare to reinvent themselves before the darkness arrives, because sometimes the difference between a fallen empire and a living future is one decision made while everything is burning.